Hey everyone, it's John Arnold here, and I want to welcome you to another Practical Disciple video. I'm really excited about this video because I'm going to walk you through what I call the 5 pillars of life-changing prayer. This is a system that I put together to help me pray better, and it's helped a lot of other people build a deeper, more meaningful connection with God. You know, the kind of connection that allows you to walk into your day feeling really grounded and centered and unruffled by what goes on in life, and be able to see God at work in your daily living. So if that sounds good to you, I think you're really going to enjoy this video. I'll walk you through all 5 pillars, and along the way I want to give you concrete actionable items you can do for each one of these, so that hopefully by the time you get done with this video, you're going to be equipped to pray better than you've ever prayed before. Now, stick around to the end of the video because I have a special opportunity coming up soon where I'm going to be teaching the 5 pillars of life-changing prayer online, live, in a very interactive way. First time I've done this, and I think you'll want to hear about that if you enjoy the content of this video. So, let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, the first pillar that I want to talk to you about is consistency. With any skill or any relationship, a foundational element is consistently investing time in it. You know, it just makes sense. If you're trying to learn a musical instrument, the guy who practices a little bit every day is going to outshine and outperform the guy who was like me when I was learning guitar, waited till the last minute day of his lesson and threw in an hour's worth of practice. Didn't work real well. Doesn't work real well for your prayer life either. We need to consistently be investing in our relationship with God. And what do I mean by consistency? Well, to start with, I would begin with just building a daily devotional time if you don't have that. What I call a sacred routine, which is a time set apart from the rest of your day for just you and God to connect with one another. And I find that one of the main struggles that people have is being consistent, and they might even feel a little guilty about not having that consistency. I met with some folks recently and surveyed them, about 15 young adults, and broke them up in small groups, and independent of one another, they all voiced a concern that they kind of feel like their relationship is a little too one-sided, that what happens is they have a tendency to only turn to God when times are hard, and then when times get good, they forget about God or they neglect God, and they don't like that. And consistency, developing a daily devotional time, will remove that guilt from your life, and you'll build a much more life-giving connection with the Lord. So, here's a tip on building a daily devotional time that you can stick to. The simplest way to stay consistent at that is to, first off, set a time and place for when you're going to do it. I know that sounds ridiculously simple, scheduling it, but it really makes a bold and dramatic difference. I survey people in my Bible study that I do online after 30 days, and I find that the people who have a set time and place for doing their Bible reading are 5 times more likely to keep doing it and not give up than the folks who don't set a regular time and place to do that reading. That's just human nature. What's important to us, we make time for. So as simple as it may sound, if you don't have a consistent daily devotional right now, the very first step you should do, that you should take, is to set a time and place for when you're going to do that. Another thing you can do to be more consistent in keeping that appointment, if you will, with God, is to tie it to a habit that you already have. So if you're habitual about having breakfast every morning, you may want to decide that, hey, I'm not going to have breakfast until I've had time with God. Or maybe, better yet, I'm going to have breakfast with God. Maybe having breakfast is the time that you have with God. So start with that. Start with a daily devotional time. 10, 15, 20 minutes. That may sound like an eternity, but that's, we can cut through that too. If that sounds like a long time because your mind wanders, there's a way to get around that. because the second pillar of life-changing prayer is focus. And I have found that focus, or a lack thereof, is an epidemic problem right now in our culture. Not surprising. You know, we're constantly interruptible. We have habituated our minds to jump back and forth between tasks constantly, with our smartphones alerting us of emails and Facebook statuses and IMs. We're almost always accessible, it seems like, and as a result, it's hard for us to slow down and be fully present to anything. Now, the good news is this: while focus is the number one struggle that I hear people share with me, it's also the struggle that I think is the easiest to address, because there's some really concrete techniques you can do to slice through that distractedness. Let me give you just 2 quick tips on that. The first one is that you have to actively engage your mind in what you're doing. And one of the best ways to do that is to use a prayer model. If you'll take something like, for example, the ACTS prayer. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's just an acronym that stands for A, adoration, C, confession, T, thanksgiving, and S, supplication. So adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. If you engage the mind by using a prayer method or prayer model, then it makes it much more difficult for your mind to wander off on your to-do list or get fixated on some conversation you had earlier. It's kind of like having an agenda for a meeting. I bet a lot of you out there watching this video have walked into a meeting before where no one had an agenda for it. And what happens is you just kind of wander all over the place, and you may or may not get something productive done. Well, going into your prayer time without using some kind of method or model or expectation for how you're going to spend that time is pretty much going to wander around like one of those pointless meetings. And that's not what you want with your relationship with God. So be purposeful and intentional about your time by having a method or a model. I said I'm going to share 2 things. You don't only want to engage your mind, but you also want to engage your body in prayer. How can you do that? Okay, well, one really simple method is to simply pick up a pen or a pencil and write your prayers out. I have found that if I write down what I'm praying, even if I don't write it word for word, if I just do bullet points or just words and phrases that come to me as I'm going along, that it's really hard for my mind to wander off as long as that pencil's moving. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you set the pencil down that you're no longer writing. In that case, you're no longer praying. So give those 2 things a try. Pick out a model and pick up a pencil and see if that doesn't make it a whole lot easier to stay focused in your time with God. When this video is over, you might want to just grab a piece of paper and a pencil and write out an ACTS prayer and see what that experience is like. All right, well, let's keep moving because we got 3 others to cover. The next pillar of life-changing prayer is what I call breadth. And that is, I describe it as building your prayer vocabulary that you have with God. One of the things that people often struggle with is they feel like, you know, I tend to only kind of say thanks or ask God for things. And it seems to me like there could be a whole lot more to prayer than that. Well, there's all kinds of different ways we can approach and converse with God and listen to God. And I'll give you one very quick tip on how to build breadth in your prayer life. One simple way to do it is to imitate really great prayers. I take the Psalms sometimes and I'll read a psalm, which is, most of them are basically prayers. I'll read a psalm and then I'll rewrite that psalm in my own words. Or another little tool that I've used that other people have found extremely helpful is a book. It's an old book by John Bailey called A Diary of Private Prayer. And that's when I started using his Diary of Private Prayer. That's when I first started to awaken to the need for a broader prayer vocabulary in my life. Because what that little diary is it's 30, I think it's 30 or 31 prayers, one for the morning and one for the evening, and facing each of those prayers is a blank page. And I would read John Bailey's morning prayer and then write my version of it over on the blank page. And what I found happening was that John Bailey prayed about all kinds of things I'd never think to pray about. So you might want to check out that resource or pick up some other kind of devotional guide, read someone else's prayer, and then pray that in your own words. And I have a feeling what you're going to find is it's going to stretch your conversation outside the walls of what it normally is with God. And that just makes for a richer, more meaningful relationship with God. So, all right, let's keep moving. Next is depth. And I describe depth as a combination of intimacy, how close we feel with God, how much we feel God's presence, and maturity, how well we're growing in our prayer life to where we have a relationship that is deeper in meaning in how we connect. Like, let me give you an example. When I was a little kid, and you've probably seen this 100 times, and I was in line at a grocery store, if I saw something that I wanted or thought I needed, I might grab my parent by the shirt sleeve or my mom's skirt or something and start tugging on and go, Mom, please, can I have a candy bar? Da, da, da. You've probably seen kids do that 100 times. And the parents trying to reason with them, and they're not listening. It turns into a meltdown a lot of times. Well, that's a pretty immature exchange between a small child and an adult. Now, as an adult, when I think that I need something and my parents might be able to help, which doesn't happen very often. I don't physically need much that I can't take care of on my own, but sometimes I need their wisdom or their advice. I go to them in a completely different manner because I have a more mature relationship with them. And one of the best ways to grow in depth that I find is to take time and do what I call presencing God at the beginning of my prayer time. It's kind of a new thing for me, but what I do is I slow down at the beginning of my prayer time and I try to imagine that I'm right there with God and that God's right there in the room with me and I'm talking directly with God. And that changes the quality of the time that I spend with God. Usually what happens is if I slow down, I kind of meditate on the awesomeness of God and the wonder of God and the joy of God before I start really leaping into prayer. Well, that really is leaping into prayer to do that. But if I'll take that kind of meditative time at the beginning to really fill my mind with the awesome reality of who God is, that it moves me to a place where I'm more humble and I'm more respectful and I'm more reverent. And I find those things lead to greater depth of relationship with God. So you might want to play with that a little bit. Start your next prayer time out with just telling God, I love you and this is who you are to me, and really slowing down and thinking about who God is before jumping into a conversation with God. All right, well that brings us to our last pillar. And I know I'm moving fast here, but I want to honor your time. This last pillar is integration. And what I mean by integration is taking prayer and moving it outside that box of a devotional time that we talked about up here and praying more throughout the day. That's part of it. But also having prayer be a preparation for and a celebration of what goes on in your daily life. So that what you're doing in your daily life flows out of the time you spend with God, and your prayer life isn't something that's disconnected from your daily living. Now, one simple way that I do that is when I start drawing near the end of my devotional time in the morning, I will try to come up with some kind of intention for the day. I call it my gift. That's another acronym. Get a couple of those today. It's an acronym that stands for Godly Intention for Today. I'll come up with a takeaway from my prayer time, which might be a task I need to do, like visiting someone or writing a note or preparing a sermon. It might be something that I feel like God really wants me to work on that's very specific. Or maybe something more general, like as I've been praying, I've realized that I've got some gossipy people around me and that I've been getting caught up in it and I don't want to do that. So I go, hey God, my godly intention for today, my gift back to you is that throughout this day, I'm going to resist getting caught up in that snare of gossip if it starts to happen around me. I'll switch the conversation or I'll gracefully bow out of the conversation so that I'm not participating in that. So I hope you get the idea of that. As you go through your prayers, just reflect back on your time and go, hey, is there something here where I can thankfully respond back to God with, or is there something God's calling me to do? Make that your intention for the day, and then really hold yourself to it as you go through the day. So there you have it. There's the 5 pillars of life-changing prayer: consistency, focus, breadth, depth, integration. Giving you a tip on each one of them. Take some of those things. Don't believe me on them. Don't just blindly trust me on it. Take them for yourself. Kick the tires of them a little bit. Try those tips out and see if it doesn't build a more consistent, meaningful connection with God. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that I have a special opportunity coming up for getting some really intensive training around the 5 pillars of prayer. And in 2-3 days here, I'm going to open up the doors for registration to a program where I am going to do a deep dive look at each one of these. It'll be highly interactive. I'm going to do it through some webinar phone calls. If you're not familiar with webinars, haven't done one before, don't worry. It's really easy to access. But I'll take and do a webinar, which is essentially like a guided PowerPoint online, but it's live. And you can submit questions to me as we're going along, and we'll dig really deep into each one of these. And you'll walk away with not 1 or 2 tools, but maybe a dozen tools by the end of one of those calls that you can pick and choose from what's going to work best for you. And you can kind of tailor, customize a program that's going to move your prayer life forward. Another element of it is going to be a community element where you're going to be able to interact with one another online and be a support and encouragement. You can kind of think about the whole thing like an online retreat. Probably a lot of you have been on a retreat before where you go off and you draw away for a couple days and you have a keynote person there, somebody who comes in and hits you with a bunch of stuff, and it's a mountaintop experience. I have a little bit of a beef with some of those with that retreat model, and that is oftentimes you get all fired up and you go home, but because you don't have ongoing access to the person who is doing the teaching, and because you don't have any community around you, in the long haul, it may or may not have a lot of impact on your life. I'm hoping that as we spread this out over 5 or 6 weeks, in fact, I'm not hoping, I know it works because I've been through experiences like this. I know that if you go through this process, what you're going to see is that you don't just have some mountaintop experience where you get a bunch of stuff dumped in your lap. But what you do is you get handed some powerful tools, you get to apply them, you start feeling more connected with God, you'll see God more visibly in your life, and if you're struggling, you'll have a community, you'll have me to turn to tweak that until you really start moving your prayer life forward in the direction you'd like to see it go. So I'll be launching this, I said, in a couple days. It's going to be a very limited group. I'm doing that intentionally because I want to be able to be very responsive to whatever questions you have. It's also, there's going to be a cost to it because it's a pretty big investment in all my time. And I want to work with people who are really invested in this process. So I'll go over more details about this, like what's going to go on in each one of these segments in a video in a couple days here. I'm going to put together something with all the details for you. But if you think that you're interested in digging deeper on this stuff, if you were kind of feeling as you were walking through this video that maybe it's time for you to step up the game a little bit in prayer, then there's a box below that you can drop your email address in, and I'll make sure that you get notified when that registration process opens up so that you can take part in this and not miss out on this really unique opportunity. Well, I hope this video has been a blessing to you. I've really enjoyed the time with you. I'm excited and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you in the 5 Pillars of Prayer life-changing program that we're going to be working on. So take care now and have a really blessed day.